Nora Chen stood before the tall mirror in the guest chamber, watching her reflection blur through unshed tears. The wedding dress hugged her small frame like a beautiful prison, all white silk and delicate beadwork that caught the afternoon light. She had never imagined her wedding day would feel like attending her own funeral. Outside the window, she could hear the bustling preparations. Servers arranged crystal glasses on long tables. Musicians tuned their instruments. Guests arrived. In expensive cars, their laughter floating up to her room like cruel mockery. Everything was perfect, except for one small detail. The bride did not want to marry. Her grandfather, Dr. Raymond Chen, entered without knocking. His weathered face carried the weight of tradition and duty. He had raised Nora since she was 6 years old, after the accident that stole her parents, and her voice in one terrible moment. For 18 years, he had been her whole world. "Child," he said softly in Mandarin, knowing she could read his lips perfectly. "Today you begin a new chapter. Victor Sterling is a good man, even if he seems harsh. He will provide for you, protect you. That is what matters." Nora's hands moved rapidly, forming signs her grandfather had never bothered to learn. Her frustration showed in the sharp movements, the desperate plea in her dark eyes. But Dr. Chen simply shook his head. "You are 24 now. I am getting old. Who will care for you when I am gone? This marriage ensures your future." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "And it repays an old debt. Victor's father once saved my life. This union honors that bond." So that was it. Nora was being traded like currency to settle a debt. She wanted to scream, to run, to make someone understand that she had dreams beyond being some man's obligation. But silence had been her companion for so long, it felt like the only friend she had left. The ceremony of strangers. The garden ceremony took place under a canopy of ancient oak trees. White roses lined the aisle, their perfume thick and suffocating in the warm air. Nora walked alone toward the altar, her hand clutching a bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. Victor Sterling waited at the end of the aisle, and when Nora first saw him clearly, her breath caught. He was tall and powerfully built, his dark suit emphasizing broad shoulders and a commanding presence. His face was handsome in a harsh way, all strong angles and sharp features. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were deep blue, almost navy, and completely empty of warmth. He watched her approach with the same expression someone might wear while reviewing a business contract. No smile, no recognition of the moment's significance. Just cold assessment. When she reached his side, Victor gave a slight nod, nothing more. They stood together, but completely apart, two strangers bound by obligation rather than choice. The officiant began speaking about love and commitment, words that felt like lies in the tense silence between bride and groom. When it came time for vows, Victor recited his in a flat, emotionless voice. Each word was precise and empty. Nora could not speak her vows, so she simply nodded when prompted. She kept her eyes fixed on the white roses at her feet, unable to meet his cold gaze. The kiss was brief and mechanical. Victor's lips barely brushed hers, cold as winter rain, before he pulled away. There was no tenderness, no spark, no hint that this was supposed to be the beginning of a life together. The guests applauded politely, and Nora felt her heart crack, just a little more. Inside the Sterling mansion, the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and pitying glances. Nora sat beside her new husband at the main table while he conducted business, greeting investors and discussing deals as if this were a corporate event rather than his wedding day. She was decoration, the silent wife no one expected to contribute. When an older woman approached and said loudly, "How charitable of you, Mr. Sterling, to marry someone so unfortunate." Nora felt shame burn through her. But Victor's response surprised her. He turned slowly, his blue eyes turning to ice. "My wife," he said in a dangerously quiet voice, "has more grace in her silence than you have in all your empty words. I suggest you remember that." The woman fled, and for just a moment, Nora looked at her husband with something other than fear. Perhaps there was more to Victor Sterling than his cold exterior suggested. As evening shadows grew long, they were finally alone. A maid led Nora to a beautiful bedroom decorated in soft cream and gold. She changed into a silk nightgown someone had purchased for her, sat on the edge of the enormous bed, and waited. She heard footsteps stop outside her door. They stayed there for long minutes. She could feel Victor's presence through the wood, sense his hesitation. Then the footsteps walked away, leaving her alone. Nora finally allowed herself to cry. Silent sobs shook her shoulders as tears ran down her face. She had married a stranger who found her so undesirable he could not even enter her room on their wedding night. What she did not know was that Victor stood in his own room down the hall, hands pressed against the doorframe, fighting an internal battle. He had seen her vulnerability, her quiet dignity, the way she held herself together despite everything. Something about her called to him in a way he had not felt in years. But Victor Sterling had learned long ago that feelings were dangerous. After the accident that killed his younger brother Thomas and left him unable to father children, he had locked his heart away. Marriage was duty, nothing more. He could not afford to feel anything for this silent woman who had entered his life. Yet, as he lay awake that night, he could not stop thinking about the sadness in her eyes. The first week of marriage passed like a dream, wrapped in fog. Nora woke each morning to find the mansion empty of warmth, despite its grandeur. Every room seemed designed to impress rather than comfort, with high ceilings that made her feel small, and marble floors that echoed her loneliness back at her. She discovered that Victor kept strict routines. Every morning at exactly 6:30, she heard his door open and his footsteps descend the grand staircase. He moved with purpose, each step measured and deliberate. By the time Nora gathered courage to leave her room at 7, he was already gone, disappeared into his study or off to his office downtown. But she learned his patterns. Victor drank black coffee, always from the same blue ceramic mug. He left his newspaper folded on the breakfast table after reading only the business section. He returned home at 8 each evening, went straight to his study, and rarely emerged before midnight. They were two ghosts haunting the same beautiful house, aware of each other but never truly meeting. Nora spent her days exploring the mansion and its gardens. She found a small greenhouse behind the property where previous owners had grown herbs. It was abandoned now, windows dusty and planters empty, but it called to her. She began cleaning it, using the gardening knowledge her grandfather had taught her alongside his herbal medicine practices. Claire Mitchell, Victor's executive assistant, visited the mansion one afternoon to deliver documents. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile that seemed out of place in Victor's cold world. "You must be Nora," Claire said, speaking slowly so Nora could read her lips. "I have heard about you." Nora tensed, expecting pity or judgment. Instead, Claire pulled out her phone and opened a sign language app. "I have been learning," she said, her hands moving clumsily through basic signs. "I thought you might appreciate someone who tries to speak your language." For the first time since the wedding, Nora smiled. She signed back slowly, and Claire laughed at her own mistakes as she tried to follow. They spent an hour together, communicating through a mix of signs, written notes, and Claire's terrible but earnest attempts at signing. "Victor is not a bad man," Claire said as she prepared to leave. "He is just hurt. His brother Thomas died 3 years ago in a car accident. Victor was driving. He has not forgiven himself." Nora's hands stilled, Suddenly, the coldness made sense. Victor was not cruel. He was broken. The storm that changed everything. 2 weeks into the marriage, autumn storms rolled across the city. Rain battered the windows all day, and by evening the sky had turned black as ink. Nora was reading in the library when she heard the front door slam open with violent force. She rushed to the entrance hall and found Victor stumbling inside, soaking wet and swaying on his feet. His expensive suit clung to his body, and water pooled around his shoes. But what frightened her was his face. His skin was pale except for 2 bright fever spots on his cheeks, and his eyes were glazed and unfocused. "Sophia," he mumbled, and Nora realized he was delirious. He did not even know where he was. She rushed to his side, grabbing his arm before he collapsed. His skin burned through the wet fabric. High fever. Dangerous fever. She needed to act fast. Supporting his weight as best she could, Nora guided him up the stairs. He was much larger than her, and several times they nearly fell. But determination gave her strength. She brought him not to his distant bedroom, but to hers, which was closer. When she finally got him onto her bed, Victor was barely conscious, mumbling incoherent words. Nora's medical training from helping her grandfather took over. She needed to cool the fever before it caused serious damage. With shaking hands, she began removing his soaked jacket. The heavy fabric resisted, and she had to pull hard. Underneath, his white shirt had turned transparent from the rain, showing the outline of his muscular chest and abdomen. Nora hesitated at the shirt buttons. She had never undressed a man before. Never been this close to someone in such an intimate way. But Victor needed help, and she was the only one there. One by one, she unbuttoned his shirt, revealing smooth skin over hard muscle. A long surgical scar ran from his left shoulder down across his ribs. The accident, she realized. The one that killed his brother and left Victor unable to have children. She traced the scar lightly with her fingertips, feeling the raised tissue. Victor stirred, letting out a soft sound that made her heart race. "Focus," she told herself. "This is medical care, nothing more." Forbidden touches. Nora filled a basin with cool water and grabbed soft towels. She began wiping away the rain and sweat, starting with his face and neck. Victor's features relaxed under her gentle touch. He looked younger like this, vulnerable, with his guard completely down. She worked methodically, cooling his overheated skin. Her hands moved across his broad shoulders, down his muscular arms, over his defined chest. Each touch was necessary for his care, but she could not ignore how her pulse quickened, how her breathing became shallow. When she reached his belt, she hesitated again. She needed to remove his wet pants, but doing so felt like crossing a line. Yet the fever was everywhere. She could not leave him in soaked clothing. With trembling fingers, Nora unbuckled his belt and carefully removed his pants. Victor wore dark boxer briefs underneath, and even in her innocence, Nora could not help noticing how the fabric clung to him. She dipped the towel in cool water and continued her work, running it over his powerful thighs, his calves, trying desperately to maintain clinical detachment. But it was impossible. Something had awakened inside her, something she had never felt before. "Don't leave," Victor suddenly mumbled, his hand reaching out blindly. "Please don't leave me alone." The raw pain in those words broke something inside Nora. She caught his hand, holding it tightly. "I am here," she wanted to say. "I will not leave you." His eyes opened slightly, glassy with fever, but somehow finding her face. "You are real," he whispered. "I thought you were another dream." Before Nora could react, Victor's hand reached up and touched her cheek. His palm was hot against her skin, but the gesture was so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. She should pull away. She should maintain distance. Instead, she leaned into his touch, turning her face to press her lips against his palm. Victor made a low sound in his throat. His fingers slid into her hair, and suddenly he was pulling her down toward him. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of rain and fever and desperate need. Nora knew this was wrong. He was sick, delirious, not in control of his actions. But she could not stop. Weeks of loneliness, of being invisible, of wanting to be seen poured into that kiss. She pulled back, breathing hard, and looked into his eyes. They were clearer now, more focused. He recognized her. "Nora," he whispered, and hearing her name on his lips for the first time sent shivers through her body. The night that bound them. What happened next was a blur of heat and need and tenderness. Victor pulled her down beside him, his hands roaming over her silk nightgown with increasing urgency. Nora responded with touches of her own, exploring the landscape of his body with growing confidence. When he tugged at her nightgown, she helped him remove it, suddenly unashamed of her nakedness. His eyes traveled over her, filled with something that looked almost like reverence. "Beautiful," he breathed. "You are so beautiful." They came together in a tangle of limbs and whispered sounds. Victor's fever made everything more intense, his skin burning against hers, his kisses almost desperate. Nora gave herself completely, pouring all her locked-away emotions into every touch, every caress. It was not perfect or practiced. It was raw and real and filled with an emotion neither of them was ready to name. Afterward, Victor collapsed into deep sleep, his fever finally breaking. Nora lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering what would happen when morning came. Would he remember? Would he regret? She traced gentle patterns on his chest, memorizing the feel of him, knowing this might be the only night they ever truly connected. As dawn approached, Nora finally closed her eyes, Victor's arm heavy across her waist, binding them together in the fragile light of a new day. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows, painting golden stripes across the tangled sheets. Nora woke slowly, her body aching in unfamiliar ways. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back, and her eyes flew open. Victor was gone. The space beside her was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. He had left without waking her, without a word or note. Nora sat up, pulling the blanket around her naked body, and felt her heart sink. What had she expected? That one night of fever-driven passion would change everything between them? She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she buttoned her simple cotton dress. Shame and confusion warred inside her chest. Had she taken advantage of him while he was sick? Or had he been aware enough to know what was happening? Downstairs, the mansion was silent. No coffee brewing, no newspaper on the table. Victor had left early, probably to avoid facing her. Nora made herself tea with numb fingers, staring out the kitchen window at rain clouds gathering again on the horizon. The next 3 days passed in painful silence. Victor stayed away from the mansion entirely. Claire called to say he was sleeping at his downtown office, buried in urgent business matters. But Nora knew the truth. He was avoiding her. She threw herself into restoring the greenhouse, working, until her hands were covered in dirt and her muscles screamed. Physical exhaustion was better than thinking about the empty look in Victor's eyes when he had whispered her name, better than wondering if she had imagined the tenderness in his touch. An unexpected discovery. 4 weeks after that stormy night, Nora woke feeling strange. Her stomach churned, and the smell of her morning tea made her run to the bathroom. She had never been sick like this before, a persistent nausea that came in waves. At first, she thought it was stress. The lonely days in the mansion, the confusion about Victor, the strange limbo of being married, but not truly connected to her husband. But when the sickness continued for a week, followed by exhaustion so deep she could barely leave her bed, a terrifying possibility entered her mind. No, It was impossible. Victor could not have children. Everyone knew about the accident, the medical reports that confirmed his sterility. That was one reason Dr. Chen had agreed to the marriage. There would be no pressure for heirs, no expectations Nora could not fulfill. But her body told a different story. Claire visited that afternoon, finding Nora pale and shaking in the library. "What is wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. Nora's hands moved frantically, signing her fears. Claire's eyes widened as she understood. "You think you might be pregnant? But Victor cannot—" She trailed off, then grabbed Nora's hand. "We need to be sure. I will take you to a doctor I trust, someone discreet." 2 hours later, Nora sat in a private clinic while a kind-faced doctor performed tests. The wait felt endless. Claire held her hand, offering silent support. When the doctor returned, her smile said everything before she spoke. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. You are approximately 6 weeks pregnant. Everything looks healthy and normal." Nora's world tilted. Joy and terror crashed through her in equal measure. A baby. She was carrying Victor's child. A miracle that medical science said was impossible. But how would she tell him? Would he believe her? Or would he think she had been unfaithful, that the child belonged to someone else? Confronting the past that evening, Victor finally returned home. Nora heard his car in the driveway and knew she could not wait any longer. She had to tell him, had to see his reaction, no matter how painful it might be. She found him in his study, sitting behind his massive desk with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and tension lines around his mouth. When he saw her in the doorway, he went very still. Nora. Her name came out rough, like he had not spoken in days. "I have been meaning to talk to you." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She pulled out the folded medical report from her pocket and placed it on his desk. Victor stared at the paper without touching it. "What is this?" Nora's hands moved, signing slowly so he might catch some meaning even without understanding the language. When he looked confused, she grabbed a pen and wrote in clear letters on his notepad. "I am pregnant. 6 weeks. The baby is yours." The color drained from Victor's face. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "That is impossible. The doctors said I could never father children. The accident damaged—" He stopped, running his hands through his dark hair. "You are mistaken." Nora shook her head firmly and pointed at the medical report. "Read it," her eyes pleaded. With shaking hands, Victor picked up the paper. She watched his eyes scan the words, saw the moment reality hit him. The report was clear, detailed, undeniable. Nora was pregnant, and the timing made it clear the child was conceived the night he was sick. "This cannot be real," he whispered. "The doctors were certain. 5 different specialists all said the same thing. No chance. 0 possibility." Nora wrote again. "Miracles happen. Our baby is proof." Victor looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw his walls crumbling. His blue eyes filled with emotions she had never seen before. Wonder, fear, hope, overwhelming hope. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." Then, to Nora's shock, this strong man who had seemed made of ice collapsed into his chair and began to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. Years of grief, of guilt, of believing he was broken beyond repair poured out. Nora rushed to him, kneeling beside his chair and wrapping her arms around him. She held him while he cried, stroking his hair, letting him release all the pain he had carried alone. The truth unveiled. When Victor finally composed himself, he pulled Nora into his lap, holding her like she might disappear. I need to tell you everything, he said, his voice raw. You deserve to know why I have been so cold, so distant. He told her about Thomas, his younger brother who had been his best friend. How they had been driving home from a business dinner 3 years ago when a drunk driver ran a red light. How Victor had swerved to protect Thomas but failed. How the impact had killed Thomas instantly and left Victor with internal injuries that doctors said made fatherhood impossible. I died that night too, Victor said quietly. Not physically, but everything inside me that knew how to feel, how to connect with people. It died with Thomas. I blamed myself. I still do. Nora's hands moved, and though Victor did not understand sign language, he watched her fingers form, words with such fierce intensity that he understood the meaning. Not your fault. I agreed to marry you because it seemed safe, Victor continued. A marriage without love, without the possibility of children, without the risk of losing anyone else I cared about. I thought I could keep you at a distance. He touched her face gently. But from the first moment I saw you walk down that aisle, something stirred inside me. You were so brave, so dignified, even though I knew you did not want this marriage any more than I did. He told her about watching her through the crack in her door on their wedding night, seeing her cry silent tears that broke his heart, about how he started changing his routine just to catch glimpses of her, about the morning in the kitchen when their fingers touched over the teacup and he felt electricity for the first time in years. That night I was sick, Victor said, his voice dropping lower. I thought I was dreaming. When I woke up with you in my arms, I panicked. I felt something real, something deep, and it terrified me. So I ran. I have been running from my feelings for you since the day we met. Nora pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. She wrote quickly, "And now?" Victor read the words and smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Now, I am done running. That baby inside you is a miracle, but the real miracle is you. You brought me back to life, Nora. You made me feel again. He cupped her face in both hands. I love you. I have probably loved you since you handed me that first cup of tea and looked at me like I was worth saving. I am sorry it took me so long to realize it. Finding her voice. Nora's hands shook as she wrote her response, tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. I love you too. From the moment you defended me at our wedding reception, from every small kindness you showed even when you were trying to stay distant. I love you. Victor kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me again, he whispered. A real wedding this time, where we both choose each other, where we say vows that mean something. Nora nodded, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. The next months transformed their lives completely. Victor learned sign language with dedicated intensity, practicing every evening until he could have full conversations with his wife. He attended every doctor's appointment, his hand always finding Nora's, his eyes full of wonder each time they heard their baby's heartbeat. Dr. Chen visited and was stunned to see the change in both of them. Victor welcomed him warmly, thanking him for the arranged marriage that had brought Nora into his life. The old man smiled, perhaps knowing all along that these two damaged souls needed each other. Claire became Nora's closest friend, helping her prepare the nursery and shop for baby clothes. The mansion filled with laughter and light for the first time in years. One evening in her 7th month, Nora and Victor sat in the restored greenhouse, surrounded by blooming herbs. He had his hand on her swollen belly, feeling their daughter kick. What should we name her? Victor asked. Nora signed the name they had discussed. Hope. Perfect, Victor agreed, because that is what you gave me. hope for a future I thought I had lost forever. As they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Nora felt something shift inside. Her, not the baby, but something deeper. A tightness in her throat that had been there since she was 6 years old suddenly loosened. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in 18 years, sound emerged. Just a whisper, rough and uncertain, but unmistakably a voice. "I love you," she said aloud, the words clumsy but real. Victor froze, his eyes going wide. "Nora? Did you just—" "I love you," she repeated, stronger this time, tears streaming down her face. He pulled her into his arms, both of them crying and laughing. The miracle was complete. Not just the baby they had created against impossible odds, but the healing they had found in each other. Two broken people made whole through love. The circle complete. When Hope Sterling was born on a bright spring morning, she came into the world screaming with healthy lungs. Victor cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands, tears running down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "She is perfect," he whispered, placing the baby in Nora's arms. "Just like her mother." Nora looked down at their miracle child and smiled. "Welcome to the world, little one," she said aloud, her voice still fragile but growing stronger every day. "You are so loved." Victor kissed his wife, then his daughter, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. He had thought his life was over after Thomas died. He had believed he was too broken to ever be whole again. But Nora had proved him wrong. Through her silent strength, her gentle persistence, her unwavering love, she had taught him that miracles do happen. That sometimes the things we think are impossible are just waiting for the right moment to bloom. As he held his family close, Victor sent a silent thank you to Thomas, wherever he was. His brother's death had brought unbearable pain, but it had also led him to this moment, to this woman, to this child, and that was its own kind of miracle. The end.